Close your eyes and imagine waking up in the arms of the man you believe murdered your husband. The desert cold still biting your skin, the smell of smoke still clinging to your hair, and the heartbeat you feel beneath your cheek belonging to the one person you swore you'd kill. This is the story of a widow who thought her last breath had already been stolen, but destiny wasn't done with her yet. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, share, and leave a comment for more stories like this. Now saddle up, and let's start this video. The desert night carried a silence so heavy it seemed to press against her chest as Naylin lay beneath her torn buffalo hide blanket, staring at the fading embers of the fire. She had not slept since the attack. Every time her eyes closed, she saw the flash of steel, the shadow of the man who had taken her husband's life, and the sound of her own screams swallowed by burning sage. Now alone in the darkness, dust clinging to her swollen face, she waited for death to take her too. It felt inevitable. It felt deserved. The world she knew had ended. But death never came. Instead, the sharp scent of tobacco drifted through the air just moments before rough hands lifted her from the ground. She didn't fight. She didn't speak. She let the night swallow her as consciousness slipped away. When she awoke again, the world swayed beneath her. She was on a horse. Her wrists were bound. Her throat burned like she had swallowed sand. The sun pierced her eyelids, forcing them open, and in that blinding light she recognized the broad silhouette riding beside her. The man who had killed her husband. Fear surged through her, but her body was too weak to react. She slumped forward, held upright only by the rope tied around her. The killer didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the horizon, jaw set like carved stone, as if escorting a dying widow across the desert was an ordinary chore. His name, she would later learn, was Colt Mercer, a drifter with a scar that dragged across his cheek like a claw mark. She hated him instantly. She wanted to curse him, but her voice failed her. Hours passed before Colt stopped near a dry creek bed and hauled her off the horse like a wounded animal. He placed her beneath the shade of a lone, twisted mesquite tree. She expected him to finish what he had started, to slit her throat, leave her for the vultures, or simply walk away. Instead, he pulled a canteen from his saddlebag, uncorked it, and pressed it to her lips. Water dripped down her chin, cold and startling. She recoiled from his touch, but instinct made her swallow. She hated herself for needing anything from him. Colt didn't speak the entire time, not even when she glared at him with all the rage she could muster. He simply watched her with unreadable eyes, as though he was studying a creature he didn't understand. When she had drunk enough to steady her head, he cut the ropes binding her wrists. She rubbed the raw skin and scanned the empty desert, calculating escape, but she had no strength left. Colt knew it. He wasn't worried. He sat opposite her, his rifle across his knees, and lit a cigarette. The smoke curled around him like a ghost. Naylin forced herself to ask the only question consuming her. "Why am I alive?" Her voice cracked like dry bark. Colt didn't answer immediately. He took another drag, eyes drifting to the mountains in the distance. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and low, as if discussing weather instead of murder. "Because you weren't supposed to die," he said simply. No apology, no remorse, just a fact. Naylin felt her stomach twist with hatred. She wanted to lunge at him, scratch at his eyes, scream until the desert broke open, but she could barely sit upright. The hours stretched into night. Colt made a small fire and placed a tin of beans by the flames. The smell made her stomach growl, embarrassing her. He noticed but didn't comment. Instead, he slid the tin toward her before turning away. She hesitated, uncertain whether to trust the food, unsure what he wanted. But hunger won, and she ate slowly, each bite igniting painful reminders of her husband's laughter, their shared meals, the warmth that once filled her life. Now she sat across from the man who stole it all, eating in silence beneath a starless sky. When she finished, Colt tossed her a rolled blanket and nodded toward a patch of soft sand. She considered refusing. She considered staying awake all night to watch him, to find a moment to strike. But exhaustion overwhelmed her. She lay down, staring at the fire as sleep tugged at her like a cruel hand. Before her eyes finally closed, she whispered her husband's name, promising herself she would avenge him, even if it took years, even if she had to play along with this killer's strange mercy. She would not die before making him pay. But when Naylin awoke, everything was different. The fire had burned low and the cold air strung her skin. She shifted, expecting to feel the rough blanket beneath her. Instead, her cheek rested against something warm, solid, and moving with slow breaths. Her eyes snapped open. She was in Colt Mercer's bedroll, his arm draped loosely over her as if she was someone he meant to protect. She froze, every muscle locking. His scent, leather, smoke, and dust surrounded her. Terror flooded her so quickly she nearly gasped aloud. She didn't know how she got there. She didn't dare move. For a long moment she lay still, listening to his steady breathing, trying to convince herself she was not in danger. But how could she be safe in the arms of the man who had shattered her life? Rage and fear coiled inside her like two snakes fighting. She considered grabbing the knife at his belt, inches away from her fingers. She imagined plunging it into his chest. She imagined freeing herself from the nightmare. But as she reached out, Colt stirred, tightening his hold slightly before breathing deep again. She exhaled shakily, realizing her chance had vanished. And so she remained there, trapped in the killer's bed, the dawn creeping across the canyon walls, unsure whether this strange entanglement was the beginning of her death or the beginning of something far more dangerous. Naylin slowly eased herself out of Colt's arm, careful not to wake him. Her heart hammered violently, each beat reminding her how close she had come to killing him in his sleep. She crawled from the bedroll, cold sand clinging to her hands, and rose to her feet unsteadily. The morning sun cast a soft red glow across the desert, painting the world in muted colors. She scanned the horizon, looking for any sign of escape, water, a settlement, even a trail she might follow. But the land stretched barren in every direction, leaving her anchored to the place she despised most. Colt woke a moment later, blinking against the rising light before sitting up. He didn't look surprised to see her standing apart from him. He watched her silently, rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to remember why she would fear him so deeply. "You shivered in the night," he finally said. "I didn't want you freezing." His voice carried no shame, no expectation of gratitude, just another cold truth spoken out loud. Naylin clenched her jaw, refusing to respond. She wouldn't show appreciation, not to the man who had made her a widow. They broke camp in silence. Colt packed his supplies with practiced efficiency while Naylin stood rigid, her eyes never leaving him. She didn't understand this man, why he kept her alive, why he treated her gently, why he spoke so little. It made no sense. Murderers didn't offer water or blankets. They didn't share warmth. They didn't save the very person who watched them spill blood. As they mounted the horse, Colt lifted her carefully, almost respectfully, before settling behind her. His arm brushed her waist lightly as he took the reins, and she stiffened as though burned by fire. The journey that followed was long and suffocating. The desert stretched endlessly, and the sun climbed higher, beating down on them without mercy. Naylin tried once again to find an explanation, replaying the night of her husband's death over and over. The raid, the chaos, the gunshot that struck her husband's chest, and the moment she saw Colt's face illuminated by the flames. She had believed then that he was part of the men who stormed their camp. But now, after hours riding with him, she sensed something different, an unease in him, a weight in his silence that didn't match the cruelty she'd expected. By afternoon, they stopped near a spring hidden between jagged rocks. Naylin stepped away from Colt the moment her feet touched the ground, but he didn't try to restrain her. Instead, he crouched by the water and began filling his canteen. She watched him carefully, hands trembling with anger and frustration. "Tell me the truth," she demanded finally. "Why did you kill him?" Colt froze. The question lingered in the air like smoke. When he turned to face her, the hardness in his eyes had softened. "I didn't," he said quietly. "Your camp was attacked by cattle thieves. I chased them. One ran through your fire. I shot him. But your husband, he was killed by one of their own." Her breath caught painfully in her throat. She wanted to reject the words immediately, to call him a liar. But something in his tone, the exhaustion etched into his face, forced her to hesitate. "I saw you," she whispered. "You stood over him." Colt nodded slowly. "I stayed to make sure the one who killed him was dead. That was the man lying beside your husband." His voice cracked slightly, the first fracture she had heard. Naylin felt the ground tilt beneath her. Her hatred, once solid and certain, wavered. Could she have been wrong? Could grief have blinded her? She backed away, clutching her hair as tears welled in her eyes. The truth warred with memory, and the more she replayed the night, the more she realized her own shock had blurred the details. The firelight, the smoke, the bodies, it had all been a blur. She had assumed the tall stranger with the scar was the murderer. She had blamed the wrong man. Colt didn't approach her. He stayed kneeling by the water, hands still, eyes lowered. "I carried you out because the thieves intended to return," he said quietly. "They would have killed you too." His confession shattered the certainty she had clung to. They traveled again at dusk, The atmosphere between them changed. The rage inside her had softened into confusion, guilt, and a strange pull she couldn't name. She stole glances at Colt, noticing the way he avoided looking at her as though her presence shamed him. When they reached a small abandoned cabin near the foothills, Colt dismounted and helped her down. This time, she didn't jerk away from him. Instead, she studied him with new eyes, seeing the quiet grief behind his strength, the loneliness lingering in every gesture. He wasn't a cold killer. He was a man carrying burdens she didn't yet understand. Inside the cabin, Colt lit a lantern and set his rifle aside. Naylin sat near the wall, unsure of what to say. The silence hung between them until she finally whispered, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Colt hesitated, staring at the flame. "You wouldn't have believed me," he admitted, "and I thought maybe you needed someone to blame." His honesty cut through her like a blade. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, grief pouring out in waves. Colt stood uncertainly, then slowly approached and knelt beside her. She didn't move away. For the first time since the attack, she felt something close to safety. As the night deepened, the storm inside her quieted. She leaned against Colt's shoulder, exhausted from pain and revelation. He wrapped an arm around her with a gentleness she hadn't expected, his warmth steady and grounding. In that silent embrace, she realized her hatred had transformed into something else, a fragile trust born from truth. Her husband was gone, and nothing would change that. But the man she had blamed, the man she thought she despised, had become her protector. When she finally drifted to sleep, her head resting against his chest, she no longer feared waking beside him. By morning, Naylin felt a strength she hadn't known since before the raid. She stood outside the cabin watching the sun rise while Colt packed their few belongings. "Where will you go now?" he asked gently. She looked toward the horizon, feeling the weight of choice. "Wherever the trail leads," she said softly, "but I don't want to walk it alone." Colt's breath hitched, a faint emotion passing through his eyes. He nodded slowly, understanding her unspoken words. Together, they mounted the horse and turned toward the open plains, riding side by side into a future neither had expected. And in the quiet rhythm of hoofbeats, Naylin realized something she never thought possible. She had lost everything she once loved, yet somehow found the one soul strong enough to help her build a new beginning. The widow who believed she would die in the ashes now rode toward life again, guided by the man she once thought was her husband's killer, but who instead became her salvation. As the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, Naylin and Colt approached a small, deserted town at the edge of the plains. The evening air carried the faint scent of burning wood, and in the distance, a dog barked weakly. For the first time in days, Naylin felt a strange sense of calm settle in her chest, as if her spirit, after wandering through endless grief and fear, was finally finding solid ground. Colt pulled the horse to a stop and looked at her, not with suspicion, but with a quiet respect that made her chest tighten. For a moment, Naylin gazed at the fading sky, then spoke softly, "I thought my journey ended that night, but maybe this new path was always meant for me." Colt nodded slowly, his eyes holding a weight he couldn't express in words. The lights of the town grew closer, and the silence between them was no longer heavy or tense. It was a pause filled with understanding, a moment signaling a new beginning. Together, they stepped forward, side by side, ready to face whatever awaited them beyond the horizon, bound by trust born from shared pain.